or love in its real essence, put into action, will never forget the foundation of beingness.
Figure this out. I've got to take all this on.
So we need to come from a position of power and strength.
All black people are free at the same time, or nobody is free.
Get people to believe in the myth, to buy into that myth.
Inspire you or inspirit you.
That's what it is, regardless of what you believe.
And so if we think of a huge pyramid, at the top portion of the pyramid is our superconsciousness.
Africa have become and is becoming. Ashe.
It's the nature of the African. The African is spirit.
What and who you attracted subconsciously can now be vigorously pursued.
Hail Jehuti, architect of truth. Give me words and power that I may envision the course of events of my life that I must follow.
60 degrees of knowledge, all in all in nothing. When intersected, the alpha becomes the omega.
Quickly, that days can be posed against night.
Founded Liberia with the intention of Christianizing and westernizing their heathen brothers.
There are many religions and many groups of people, and we cannot find ourselves through someone else's path.
Y'all gonna have to get this together. I'm gonna say some of us lost some melody.
Free your mind so your bad black ass will follow.
Come together, whether you be Islamic, whether you be Christian, whether you be of Rastafarian, whether you be Hindu, whatever you may be, we all believe and understand, for our people have never said there is not a God. For God.
Upon him said, I come not to bring a new religion, but to restore that which was given in the beginning at creation.
The hallmark of African civilization is a high moral standard.
If we look, and if we are consciously looking, we can take anywhere we are, extract, understand it, and utilize it to help our children.
We have a cultural issue before us.
Census. It is about to embark on the process of transformation.
Hail yourselves, African people, transversing eternity, walking among gods, like shuttles flying across the loom through the threads of time.
Brother James Small is an adjunct lecturer of the City College of New York Department of Black Studies. He's currently teaching a course on the life of Malcolm X, which is part of his wider specialities of African religion and culture, African American history and contemporary politics within society. Of key importance is his analysis of the role of African American youth in contemporary society, along with his in-depth knowledge of the life and times of Malcolm X. His college career has seen him working in a variety of roles within education, including administrative and managerial positions, as well as a student of counseling, both personal and co-curricular, and of course lecturing. A former president of the Eastern Region of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations since 1988 through to 1991. His current duties and obligations include Vice President of the Organization for African Peoples' Participation in Technology from 1990 through to the present. President of the PTA for the Resurrection Catholic School from 1988 through to the present. He is also a founding and executive board member of the Board for the Education of People of African Ancestry and acts as an executive board member of the KMWR Science Consortium. He is the executive director of the Institute for Youth, an organization under the direction of ASCAC, who organize and run Saturday classes in African history and culture for young people, like many of us do here. It is within this framework that he has helped to develop rites of passage for youth from ages 6 to 18. Brother James contributes regularly to the popular press by writing magazine articles, which is one of his ways of maintaining his profoundly well-established contact with the realities of the community in which he lives and works. He has also appeared on several well-known US talk shows, speaking on areas such as black, male-female relationships, analysis of the play, and Diary of a Black Man. We must meet later, Brother Small, so that you can tell me a little bit more about this. I am going to stop there and hand over to Brother Small. Welcome.
Disconnected my small mic, so now you can give me this big mic, and I can do my work. But they've got this thing working. It's coming up. See, this technology is deep over here in Manchester. But it's more than an honor, my sister, to just be announced by you. I appreciate your spirit. I'm honored to be here in Manchester. I'm glad that my brothers and sisters chose me. I should have been here a year ago, and I could not make it, so I hope that I would be able to be of service to you this time. Now, I'll preface me, I'm not the most pleasant, even though I think I'm a very pleasant man with the truth, because the truth is not the most pleasant to ears that are unaccustomed sometimes to appreciating the truth. I'm not going to apologize for Africa or Africans, either for our past or our intent to a future. I'm going to be speaking about the unity of God, but in a context that may be a little different than you're accustomed to. Because my understanding of the tradition of Africa and of the culture of Africa is that the way of life of Africans was always that of godliness. I'm going even further, that those institutions that we call religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto, and all of the derivatives thereof, are all innovations on aspects from the periphery of the African way of life. And I make that statement, and I know people will stand up and says, well, this leader or that leader had a revelation from God, and I do not doubt that at all. Because all of the religious systems that I know have brought forth very good and very strong and very meaningful ethical, moral, principle systems, or at least has attempted to bring them forward. I know that all of the founders of the various religions that we know, the little we do know about their history, and that is oral traditions that was written down hundreds of years later. In our honesty, if we are to be what we say, we must first agree in this moment to be honest with ourselves. There is not a holy book in the world that was not first oral tradition, passed from mouth to ears for quite a number of years before written down. Some may say that they are more authentic in maintaining their truth or their original truth than others, and I can't dispute that. What I can dispute is the condition of the world that has been in the hands of those who profess to be in tune with and in submission to those faiths. What I do have is the condition of Africans and the history of their genocide for nearly 3,000 years at the hands of those who say they submit to those faiths. What I do have is the condition of a people on a continent who have not shown in any of its significant history that they would reach out to destroy other peoples simply for greed and material gain. Because history shows that the Africans quite had that capability for thousands of years before anybody else had. And we did not practice genocide on humanity. And so I beg us to let our consciousness sink deep. If I remember right, there was no Hebrew Israelite community until after their leaders lived in, spent time in, and was trained in Africa. If I'm right, there is no Christianity until God sends his son, Christ, the Jesus, meaning Savior, anointed, in hiding in Africa, where he spent most of his life learning how to be African like the other Africans. If I remember right, and I think it's in Bukhari Hadith, the Prophet Muhammad Ibn Abdullah al-Amin, peace be upon him, said, I come not to bring a new religion, but to restore that which was given in the beginning at creation. And if I'm right, all science, paleontology, anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, and genealogy established African personage, meaning the blackest blue with the tightest curls, as the genesis of humanity, and establishes African cultural value system as the genesis of all such systems. I want us to try and understand that what I'm talking about as spirituality is truth. Because spirituality are not feel-good systems you can make up. And a lot of times we use that word spirit and we have no idea what we're talking about, no idea what we're referencing. What is spiritual about any of us is how conscious we have become about what our true relationship is to the rest of this universe that we live in. That if we truly understand the nature of every prophet and every religion, when they told us that God was one, and you can find the reference to God being one going back many centuries. If you go back to the days of Akhenaten in the 18th dynasty of Egypt, which I'm going to refer to and show you some pictures in a minute, you will read one of his hymns that goes, O soul God, he who has given birth to none and who none has given birth to, and is none likened unto you, and I, Akhenaten, am your servant. And we know there's another prayer in the Islamic tradition called the Ikhlas. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Kul huwallahu ahad. Allahu samad. Walam yulid, walam yulad, walam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. Allahu akbar. Know ye that God is one, he begets none, nor is he begotten, and there's none likened unto him. We know that when Christ came, he says, I come not to break the law or violate the law, but as a fulfillment of that law. We know that when Moses gave that law, he said God gave him the law for the sake of mankind, so that we might be guided. But woe, long before Moses went up to the mountains, long before he synthesized the 42 admonitions of Ma'at, which contained the 10 that we call the 10th commandment, Africans were submitting to that law for thousands of years in written form and oral form. And Moses was raised in the house of the priest that taught the law. So maybe Moses didn't do something wrong. Maybe we misunderstood what we were being told. Maybe the mountain he went to wasn't some rock in the desert. Maybe the mountain he went to was the consciousness of his mind. Maybe he went to the only true mountain that you can go to as a spiritual being. Because only in consciousness, when you attempt to find unification with God, in your understanding, can you ascend the mountain where you can see bushes burn but not consumed? Because you will not see that anyplace else. But let's assume that all theological and theocratic history is actual history. I know none that speak against Africa negatively. I know that in the Bible, Africa is mentioned over 800 times. In the Quran, over 700 times. In both books, that one piece of landmass is mentioned more than all the rest of the world combined. Tell me why. If we say, and most of us in here I know represent that element of society that says we want to free Africa, but also sadly sometimes the one thing we seem to want to free Africa from is being Africans. If indeed you are going to free something, the first thing you've got to allow it to do is be itself. And we have failed at that. My sister, when she made reference that all religions are welcome and all religions are good, and I agree with that. Because the divisions that exist, we made them. If we go back to any of the great leaders, and I want to dwell on the religion piece first before I go further, because you are of those other religions, most of you, whether conscious or unconscious. Whether you go to church, mosque, or synagogue anymore because you've become an adult, you have been socialized into that consciousness and that value system as a child. So you are those things. And when I speak coming from Africa, it does sound sometimes like you're under attack by me. Because I remember when I sat where you sat, before I found the doorway to understand it better. It's important that you understand that most of us in this room will be dead in 50 years. Many of us will be dead in 10, some in 5, some in less time than that. That this short period of time that you have in the form of matter to make a difference in nature is very important. And if we study the history of ancient peoples all over this world, they once realized how important it is. Sometimes when I think of the largest black community in any country in the world, and I know most of you would think Brazil or Nigeria, but it's actually India, one of the oldest African populations in the world. But history have changed our view of those people, who are us. But if you look at their system, the Hindu system, and you look at their structure of so-called gods, the West call them gods. They do not call them gods because they have a higher word for that which they call the cause and the creation. If you study the Japanese Shinto system, you will find they have an array of these so-called gods, which others call gods. They do not call them gods because they have a sense of the great causation and creation.
Forgive me, I have to make an urgent announcement. I'm very sorry about this. So the drive...
Sister, if the interruption is necessity, necessity is the mother of all things. We do that which is necessary because the mother necessity dictates it. That's the law of nature. So let me come back to talking about all these religious systems that have these kind of gods attached. And I just told you the Hindus got a bunch of them. And the Shinto of Japan have a bunch of them. And the Yorubas, for God's sake, of West Africa's got thousands of them. And the voodoo people of Dahomey and Haiti and Louisiana got thousands of them. these gods, these deities, these Loas, these Orishas, these different aspects, all these many gods. And then there are those who say of them, oh, they are polytheistic people. Oh, these are animist people. Oh, they worship all these different gods. But I remember once when I was younger, I used to be a Muslim imam with 17 communities under my jurisdiction. I went to Mecca twice and became Al-Hajj Amin Abdullah Shaheed. And I studied the tradition. And it sent me back to Africa to study even more. And I remember when I had to learn the 99 pearls of faith, the 99 names of God, the 99 qualities. And I goes, oh, the 99 qualities have the same qualities that 99 of the Orishas have. And I goes, oh my, the 99 qualities have the same qualities that 99 of the deities of the Hindu and the Shinto have. And then I had to say, oh my, maybe someone's not explaining something to me. Maybe they're not telling me. I agree with you. Leave him alone. Let him have his way. Don't try to quiet him or nothing like that. Let him have his way. You know? Yeah, he's got more rights than we got at this point. You know? So. But when that revelation came, that the pearls of faith were not just names to give to newly born Muslim kids, but they represent the quality and the attributes of the causation and the sustainer of that which it caused to come out of itself into being. And if you bring something out of yourself, it is yourself. You understand what I'm saying? If something comes out of you, it is you. So often we want to get in this thing of naming God. You cannot name something unless you know its perimeters. And no one knows the perimeters of God. Matter of fact, you cannot imagine the notion of perimeter, because if you can, that's not God that you're talking about. You understand what I'm saying? No, this is deep. Y'all got to really grasp this thing, because people have been playing with your heads, and you can't construct your family strong enough, and you can't construct your personal lives strong enough, and you can't construct your community strong enough, because the stuff you need for the psycho-spiritual construction is too weak to do it with. And even though you have the data, it's not being explained so that you can utilize it for your salvation. So I'm going to try to just say a little as the ancestors in spirit help me to do it, because I don't know nothing, except that there's a whole bunch I need to know. But the little bit of nothing I will share. The notion of God is the most significant thing in the world to understand, because if you see God separate from yourself, you are blind. You cannot put a God before God, because there's nothing but God. In Ghana they say, Gi and Yami, none but God. Nothing exists but God. We are just an aspect of that existence. I think what we're doing, we're confusing our intellectual definitions with these sounds we make called language with what really exists. And we have to be careful what we're doing. Because this rug on the floor is probably made from synthetic, and more likely petroleum-based synthetic. And this wood is made from trees that grew out of that earth that the petroleum is in, that the rug was in. And those plastic chairs you're sitting on is made from petroleum that comes out of the earth, that come from plants and animals that rotted centuries ago, that came from living things that ate the vegetables that existed because of the oxygen and the water that existed because of the other minerals and elements. Everything is the same thing, just transposed differently in the process of its evolution. Everything. There is but one thing in existence, and we are just different manifestation of aspects of that one thing. And African culture speaks to that in that way in all of its tradition. Do y'all understand what I just said? Okay. I got to make sure, because that's important. Because too often we separate ourselves. We have families. Somebody say, I'm a Muslim, so I'm not speaking to my cousin who's a Christian, and I'm a Christian, so I'm not speaking to my cousin who's a Muslim. Some say I'm Hebrew Israelite, so I'm not talking to my brother who's a Muslim, and I'm not speaking to the one who's an atheist, and I ain't having nothing to do with that one who thinks he's the follower of Minister Farrakhan. Then one says, I'm a Yoruba man, so I'm not speaking to the Santeros or the Lucame, and I'm certainly not talking to the Voodoo man. And the only problem with them is they're ignorant of the bit of knowledge they don't have that the other ones got. But none of them have any more knowledge than any would need to know if they're to understand the faith they claim they're in. Did y'all understand that? That there is not a single so-called religious system or spiritual system out here that requires any different information if it is to deliver to you what all of them claim they can. And that information is to have an understanding of the law of nature. Let me tell you what I mean, because people trying to say, you know, there's this opposition between science and religion, which is the silliest discussion in the world. Silly discussion. In ancient Egypt, then I'll show you some pictures of those black folks. They have a book called the Pyramid Text. Oh, it's older than the Torah, it's older than the Quran, it's older than the Bible, it's older than any of the books you know, it's older than Homer's great-great-great-granddad. The Pyramid Text. In the Pyramid Text, they have a Genesis story. In this story, and listen to the familiar themes in the story now. I'm going to try to recount aspects of the story. In this Genesis story in ancient Egypt, a document that was circulating at least as early as 3000 to 4000 BC, they said in the beginning was this darkness. Does that sound familiar? And in this darkness was this water called Nun. And what they're really referencing your ancestors was liquid matter. And then out of this darkness and this water arose Ptah, the primordial hill, or solid matter. And above Ptah rose Ra, energy, symbolized by the sun. Now you got solid matter and energy. This is really quantum physics, people. But they were kicking this back at 4000 BC with some black folks along the Nile trying to explain reality to themselves, and wrote it down in a book called the Pyramid Text, which has been in the British Museum for years. But they don't teach it at Oxford. No. Then it goes on, their Genesis story. It says, then they became conscious, Ptah and Ra, of Amun. Amun is the hidden cause that caused all of this to be. That which we dare to call God, which is beyond our knowability, so the Africans call it that which is hidden. And then they went further with their creation story. With the solid matter out of liquid matter and the energy and the hidden cause, they then produce moisture and air, Shu and Tefnut. Matter, energy, moisture, and air. And moisture and air symbolize what, you know, the air when I was talking about Obatala, the substance out of which all other matter, energy form will be manifest. And together they produce man and woman, initially in the form of Asar and Aset, who then proliferate the rest of humanity. Now, what's wrong with that story? Nothing. Because later some people would write another book called the Torah, and you still use that as the early portion of your Bible that says, and the darkness moved upon the face of the water. And everything the Egyptians said was created, they will say that God created these things in these sequels in time. The story doesn't differ that much except for language and the poetic language that is being used, especially in the English version of it. But if you went to West Africa, the Yoruba has a story. The Yoruba said God, Oludumare, was hanging out up in heaven or in the realm of Arun. And it's good to feel light about this. Sometimes we get too serious about these things, get strokes and stuff. Good, healthy, spiritual people don't die from strokes and heart attacks. Most of the times we don't die, we just disappear. Good, healthy, spiritual people. Oludumare looked down in its realm, or Olu-Arun, the god of heaven, the deity of heaven. In his aspect as Oludumare, the creator, looked down into the waters and the darkness. And there's a number of renditions, but I'm going to cut some corners and go quickly to just one. And they decided to send the Orisha Obatala down. So they gave him a little earth. Remember, Orishas are big people. You know, they're beyond your scope of understanding and size. So in a conch shell, he had soil. And then he had a chameleon and a chicken. And then he had some palm nut seeds. And they told him to go down and to spread this dirt, and which would create the continent and the earth, and to plant the palm nuts and to begin to make what would become man and woman. And he looked and said, but I can't get down there, that's too far from heaven. So then they called about the second oldest Orisha, they called Ogun. You know, Ogun is supposed to be the god of iron, the god of metals, metallurgy. But remember, everything comes out of the earth now. Metal comes out of the earth, just like the oil comes out of the earth, just like the plastic comes out of the earth, just like the synthetic rug comes out of the earth, just like the tree comes out of the earth, just like the food you eat comes out. Mother gives us everything. So we weren't crazy calling her Enile, mother, Iya, mother, because it gave us everything. But Ogun means something else esoterically. This Ogun that people say is the god of iron also is symbolic of the cleanser, that which cleanses one spiritually when you have contaminated yourself out of necessity. So that even before there was a Yoruba community in West Africa, the notion of Ogun existed in African communities as those forces, both visible and invisible, that would cleanse the hunter who had to violate themselves by killing their brothers and sisters for food before they could come back into the village with humanity. So the process of cleansing was carried on by Ogun. And so we need to understand that when you forge metal, what you're trying to do is burn out what is called the impurity so that the purest element left could be used to do the work you had to do. So he became symbolic not of iron as much as Ogun became symbolic of spiritual cleansing. Do you understand that? That when you get some steel and you heating it up and you beating on it, you're taking out the impurities and you're getting the most pure of what you can produce as a metal. Okay? And so what Ogun does is make a gold chain for Obatala that could reach down to the waters. And then Obatala climbed down the chain, and he began to climb. But he realized when he reached the bottom, he was just not quite on earth yet. So he poured his sand, his soil, down. And then he let the chicken and some story says dove, some says other, and the chameleon down. And they got to carrying on and scratching and kicking around, and they spread it out the continents. And then he realized he still couldn't get down, so he dropped the palm seeds, the palm tree seeds. And a tree grew just tall enough to reach the bottom of the chain. So he was able to climb down. And just like in ancient Egypt, God Khnum fashioned man and woman on his potter's wheel. he began to do just like the Christian and Muslim and the Hebrew tradition says, to fashion man from the soil, from the mud. But on the way down, he discovered something. Palm wine. You know, the tree bloomed and grew, and he got some nuts, so he got to drinking a little palm wine. And in the process, he malformed some of the forms that he was making, right? And so today, till this day, they said when you see someone who's crippled or malformed at birth, that is a child of Obatala. But he fell asleep on the job. He didn't complete the process. He had created these forms, but he hadn't given life to it yet. So the Creator up in Arun or heaven says, let's send Oduduwa to finish this. Now there's many interpretations, but here's how mine go. Oduduwa is the wife of Obatala. All Orishas have a feminine and a masculine aspect to them. And Oduduwa comes and finishes creation, but what is clear is that the masculine can create the form, but it took the feminine to give it life. And when you begin to look at the African tradition from ancient Egypt, every one of the hundreds of netters in Egypt, what we call Orisha and Loas in Voodoo and the Yoruba tradition, they call it the Neteru. N-E-T-E-R-U, Neterus, and it's two flag. You know the pennants you wave at the ball games, the little triangle pennants? If you see two of those, you know you're talking about the qualities of God. If you see one in the hieroglyph, you're talking about God Almighty, right? And so these netters, these qualities of God, the Egyptians had understood thousands. Let me tell you what this whole thing is about. Ancient people understood that we were and we are nothing more than an expression of that which is. And that we must struggle to raise our consciousness to understand that. And in order to do that, you must learn certain qualities and attributes that is part of the causation of what we call God. Some societies discern thousands of them, some less. Christian society, for instance, have isolated 12 major ones. Sometimes they call the 12 tribes of Israel. Look up those tribes' names. Look up the definitions. They're nothing but quality and attributes. Sometimes they call the 12 disciples. Look it up. Follow the name back into Greek. You're talking about quality and attributes. You're not talking about persons as such. Those persons in the Bible are nothing but anthropomorphic representation of qualities and attributes. The same way a good playwright will take jealousy and make that a character, love and make that a character, hate and make that a character, envy and make that a character, kindness and make that a character, and give them a situation to interplay in and see what the result will be. You understand what I'm saying? So these things that we are talking about, these Orishas, these deities, these Loas, these Netters, these are the qualities and attributes that societies figured out was necessary to build the ethical, moral personality that could struggle towards harmony and balance with other human beings and the rest of nature. The institutions that was put together to maintain the continuity and the consistency of this teachings is what you call religion, something that is going to bind you back, because that's what the word religion means, to bind back. What you're trying to bind back to is the rest of that nature out of which you come and out of which you, like our ancestors, will surely return. And the idea of culture, you know, when we, just the word culture, what are we talking about? Cultivate, to cause something to grow in a certain positive and consistent fashion. What is it that we want to cultivate? The best of our ancestors. Because no matter what you think of your present is no more than the result of your past. And your future, that which does not yet exist, depends on what you do in the present with what you have learned about your past. And if you think that you can have any sort of present that's worth anything, or create a future that is worth anything without having a more significant understanding of the past, then you're mistaken. And one of the reasons why African peoples across the world is in the situation we are in, because we've lost our institutional control for transferring knowledge from the past into our present to construct our future. So this thing we call spirituality, I would lie to you if I tell you I knew what it was. I can tell you I think that I might be able to allude to what it might be. I think I might be able to allude to what it might be. And to me, what it might be is that energy, that first vibration, you know, like the ripple in the water that seems so eternal. That first vibration, and even that's not sufficient because it can't be first, because that presupposes it didn't exist, and the vibration of life has always existed, so I can't even say that first vibration, because that wouldn't be right. Because numbers is our limited way of trying to account for what we think are the fragments of things. But that vibration which is in everything, and without that vibration, we are in that state we call dead. When you become conscious enough of that vibration to determine what it does and with whom it does it, then you have established yourself spiritually. And it does not appear to me, as it seemingly did not appear to the ancients, that this could be done without what they referred to as ethical, moral, and principled behavior on the part of the human being. And when we study ethical, moral, principle, rules, and regulations, it all had to do with, I should not do anything intentionally to harm or injure anybody or anything in nature. That I should live to give life to everything and only taking of anything to sustain the life in myself. And that there's rules for this, because the socialization process that we get into make us deviate. It makes us lose consciousness of these things. In Africa, they didn't need a university because the village was the university. The community was the university. The family was the university. And don't take that lightly, because it was a much better university than anything we've been able to construct as an abstract aside for an elite few in the community. Because what the Africans understood is that everybody in the community had to have the same knowledge in order for that community to work. You could not have an elite few governing over the many. It doesn't work. You have to suppress somebody to have authority. And there are those who say they believe in God but still believe that somebody must rule over somebody else who's their equal. How could that be? You can only rule over that which is not your equal, and if someone is not your equal, it should be your obligation to bring them to your equal. But it must be established that I'm not just speaking abstractly. So I'm going to go back and do what I usually do in my class, because this is important. Pictures. And then I'm going to do some overhead. But first, just some photographs, and I hope that in the back you'll be able to at least see it and understand what I'm saying, and I'll help you. You know, when we see this particular picture, the Sphinx of Giza, when we see this, I don't know what everybody thinks. I know most people think of it as a statue, an old statue. First thing, if you look real good, it's a woman. It's a woman's profile. Somebody said, how you know a woman's profile from a man? You can put a beard on a woman and you know you're looking at a woman's profile. There's just something about the energy in the face, you know? This profile is deep. So deep, if you look at the American dollar bill, you'll see George Washington on there. But look at George Washington's profile, the way it's sculpted. It's sculpted to be the Sphinx. Because America plays a lot of games. That's my hometown. A lot of games get played over there on Africa. But more than that, when you look at the Sphinx, what you'll see, and this is older than the pyramids, this is an old object. What you will see is the head of a human being on the body of a lion. Now we know the lion is considered to be the king of the beasts. But this head has something on it. It has a snake, which is called the uraeus, and it has a vulture. The vulture, believe it or not, is the symbol of intuitive and spiritual knowledge. The snake is the symbol of acquired cognitive or intellectual knowledge. And what the African seems to be saying, that when you fuse intellectual training and tooling and learning with the intuitive spiritual wisdom that comes from within, you can then teach the human being to master over the animal instinct that's represented by the lion. Now, do you understand that? What's important about that statement is the time in history that is being made. We're talking nearly 4,000 BC. To make such a profound statement about the spirituality of the human being and the need to balance the animal nature with the spiritual nature tells you that that community had to have been about that notion for thousands of years before. Do you understand what I'm saying? So anyone who could construct this sits at the head of spiritually designing civilization. And then there's this one, the all great pyramid. Everybody wants to claim this pyramid. Everybody wants the pyramid. They've made movies about it. They've told stories about it. They've got all kinds of skits and books about it. But the one thing we know for sure about this largest one is that the base of it equals to pi. Hello? You know pi that gave us such headache in school? You know? The mathematical symbol that the Greeks wanted to take credit for? Well, this was built before the first Greeks came out of the hills of Macedonia and decided to build anything more than a hut. Okay? And guess what? If you walk into the British Museum, just before you move from what they call the Roman period of Egypt into the period, the room that says the Nubian section, in the corner, in the right-hand corner, you will see a piece of papyrus called the Rhian Mathematic Papyrus. And in that mathematical document out of ancient Egypt, which is close to 1,700 years before Pythagoras, most of Pythagoras' so-called theorem is already constructed and worked out in it. And it's right here in your museum. But I bet they haven't taught it to you in school, have they? Then there is this building, this magnificent building. This pillared temple. They call it the Grand Lodge at Waset. The ancient Africans called this was a part of a university system, a training system called Ipet Isut. This was the part where you trained to become priest or priestess, what we now call PhD learning and other postgraduate learning. Okay? And if you don't believe that, go to Egypt and you will find all of the liberal arts and all of the mathematics of the world chiseled on the different walls in the different temples, so you know they were doing what they say they were doing, because they left it in granite stone to remind you of your legacy. Okay? But the notion of a pillared temple in our schooling have been given to the Greek, the Romans, the Dorians, and the Ionians. And this is called the Doric-Ionian style. Well, there was no Dorics, there was no Ionians, there was no Romans, and there was no Greeks when this was built. And this is in Africa. It is still there, and this is a photograph. All of these photographs, by the way, was taken by Dr. Asa Hilliard, who you will see on Sunday. Okay. Y'all hear what I'm saying? I'm trying to make a real serious point here, so that Africa has a right to speak on spiritual things, because we stand at the genesis of expressing spiritual systems. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So I'll remove this one. And then there's this fantastic one. You know, in America, this is not the one from America, by the way. This is the one from Africa. In America, they call it the George Washington Monument for years, and then they began to call it the George Washington Masonic Memorial Monument, okay? But what this symbolizes resurrection. Long before Jesus, this symbol was a symbol that was created in Africa to symbolize resurrection. And it is a supposed replica of the penis of the male that was constructed by the female in a gesture to restore God's ability to reproduce itself. You understand? And America used this as its symbol of fatherhood. Washington is the father of the nation. They use our symbol of regenerative fatherness, reproduction, and resurrection, so they knew what they were playing with in America. Yet they never told us the symbol came from Africa. Not even to this day is there one thing in D.C. telling us this is an African spiritual symbol out of an African spiritual system. What is so beautiful about those, let's look at what the people who built them look like. So we would have to use some New Age, Moorish technology, some more African technology, the glasses, the spectacles, to look at the face of Pharaoh Amenemhet, who was 12th dynasty Egypt, the Old Kingdom, and I think it's clear, even in the back, that this is an African feature and face. This is a pharaoh of Egypt, or president of the world at that time. And these are the people, and this is what they look like when these things were built. When these institutions of learning and spiritual existence was constructed and promulgated, it was done by people that looked like all the people in the auditorium. Now, all this stuff is in the British Museum, and I can't figure out how they miss it and teach the stuff they're teaching in the halls of higher learning. Now, there's always a question about who is the Egyptians. Are they black, are they white, or are they red? Right? And so I like this one. This is Mentuhotep, 11th dynasty. The Egyptians were very good chemists because the paint has lasted for thousands of years. And we can see they had white paint, red paint, and black paint. Right? And what is so peculiarly wonderful, look at how they chose to use the paint. White paint for their garments to symbolize the purity of the priest's craft. Red paint for the head to deal with the fire that goes on in the mind. And black paint for their beautiful bodies. This one I always carry with me. This is the first one, the first brother. This is a side view of Amenemhet. So I can tell all my Jamaican cousins, we love the fact, boy, that you kept that Rasta thing going, you know? But it started way back in. All of the pharaohs wore sacred locks. And all pharaohs were also priests and priestesses, because they were female pharaohs as well. And today, in most African community in the West, where I'm very familiar, when you study the priesthood, you lock your hair as a part of your process of training for that 3 years that you must train. You can cut them in some ceremonies, you must cut them in some priesthood, depending on which craft of priest you're in, you may have the option to keep them. In Nigeria, there are those children that are born with their hair already locked, and they're considered to be very special and very sacred. You go even to Botswana, and the priestcraft in Botswana today still lock their hair during the training process. So this locking of the hair, which we see with the Nuba people and the newer people in southern Sudan, and with the Maasai people in Kenya, goes back thousands of years as many of the hairstyles that we wear, the braids and the others, the twists and so forth, back to our most ancient times. And we know that those hairstyles were used to symbolize and teach. One braiding style will tell a man, if I walked into a village and I looked around, you know, like brothers do, we look first at the sisters before we even greet the brothers in the community. And I see Sister 1 and her hairstyle tell me, you know, she's married, so I can't, and it's there. Sister 2, her hairstyle said, no, she's a virgin young and she ain't ready for no man to come fooling around. Sister 3, no, she's a widow, now she's in mourning. Sister 4, aha. And I can learn all of that by being cultural literate and recognize just the style of hair, the color of clothing, or the designs on the clothing in that community and never have to utter a word, because that's how we taught in our university that was the total community. And we still do it for those who are culturally literate today. Because if you think Africa is dead, do not fool yourself. Just go to the airport, buy a ticket, get a visa, and go. But you don't even have to do that. Just turn around, look at one another in this room today. All better than that. Just look at your mind and the fact that you came here today. And then do deeper than that. Look at the consciousness that told you you had to come here today. And you know Africa's alive and well. It just needs to be refocused. Now, I don't know what my time is, sister, so you're going to have to do that proverbial hold up the little card when you get, you know, and I don't mind that at all. Because I could do this 3-4 hours at a stretch and then drink some water and do another 3-4. So, but my point, and I want to make that point a little more, because we've been hurt so much. Our psyche have been hurt. You know, Dr. Newton is here, and she's a psychiatrist, and I have 2 daughters that was raped, so I have a sense of what traumatic stress syndrome is and the effects of it, you know. I had a son, my youngest, who was beaten up a few months ago so bad he couldn't remember nothing for 3 months, you know. So I know what trauma is. I've been shot, beaten, chased through the woods, so personally, I know what trauma is. I grew up in South Carolina, you know, southern part of the United States. Things was rough back in the days, like the kid says. But you learn from those experiences. And we've got to understand that we as a people have had some traumatic stuff laid on us psycho-spiritually. You understand? Intellectually. And when we face it, it'll help us, you know? And I use the rape because most women and men, we got to take responsibility for this, and especially African men, because our primary role model for the most part in the last 3 centuries have been white men, and their primary attitude towards our women was to be rapists, and so we better be careful about our behavior, because maybe our primary attitude towards our women is similar. Don't get uptight, brothers. I know they're saying, why Brother Small going there? Because our sister's primary role model in the last 500 years has been the white woman, and her primary attitude towards the black man was to destroy him, to dehumanize him. This is not nobody messing with our white brothers and sisters sitting there, because y'all need to understand this too. Otherwise, you'll never know how to be our friend and our brothers and our sisters anymore, unless you understand this. If we don't know what was done to us, we're not going to know how to undo this thing. You understand? You're not going to know how to undo this. Trauma, you're not over it, because you haven't dealt with the fact that the trauma happened in the first place. And so spirituality and spiritual systems have been the things we've used to help us through the trauma, but some of the spiritual systems themselves have caused trauma. And they've caused it because they've denied your essence. And denied the fact that you had a vision of what spirituality was before being impacted by this new system. And the new system told you had to deny that which you knew to be reprogrammed into that which they wanted you to know, which have proven insufficient to have you run your community in Manchester, Leeds, Leicester, Bristol, Liverpool, New York, South Carolina, Georgia, and London, and so forth. And we've certainly been here long enough, got enough money, got enough education to at least run the little communities we're in, and we can't, with all of this fantastic knowledge. Then we got to ask, what is wrong? We're as smart as anybody else, because we're running everybody else's business. We just can't run ours. And you've got to understand why. So I'm going to show these three little boys. Three pictures of one little boy, and that's what I've been leading into, because he's one of the most well-known little African in the world. You know him as King Tut, this pretty little black boy. So I'm going to show you his gold mask, so you can see it's a little black boy. Look at him. He's just a little black boy, right? Tutankhamun, a little black boy. Yet the world refused to see him as a little black boy who became a little black prince, who became a little black king, who was the Pharaoh of Egypt before he was in his late teens and was murdered before he reached his 20th birthday. Yet this famous little black child has never been taught to our people as being a little black child, yet it is obvious in looking at the mask that his ancestors had constructed, if not he himself had constructed of him, that this is a little black child. Here is another one of him, which is even another one of those gold masses, which is even more obvious that this is a little black child. Then why won't the world say we are dealing with this little black boy and what he represents to us as a people? But when he painted himself, or had himself painted as a little black boy, and this statue is in the Cairo Museum, the tourist guides, most of whom was trained by British scholars, tell us that he's black because he's cursed. That's what they tell us. Because we have to beat him up to get the stuff changed. Brother Hunter, how you doing, Brother Adam? All right, brother. Good to see you, brother. I miss you. You've been gone a long time from my world, you know. We got to talk. That's Dr. Hunter Adams. That's my brother. I love him. And I'm not afraid to say that. Here's this little black boy, in his time, painting himself as a young black man. Now, what's important about that, now, I take some liberty with this because I make this projection myself. I say this is the boy's mama. This is either his mama or his grandmother. This is Queen Tiye. This is a big black woman, sat on the throne of Egypt for 60 years. Is it not obvious that this is a black woman, an African woman? This statue is a little statue. It sits in the Berlin Museum, been there for years. Why don't they put in all the history book and teach her role? She did more than Queen Elizabeth or Bloody Mary or any of those others did. You know? This is one of the greatest women in the history of the world. But then let's look at her. You just saw who I think is her grandson or her youngest son. Let's look at who I think is her son, her eldest son. We know this is her eldest son. This is the Pharaoh Akhenaten, the husband of Nefertiti. They show us Nefertiti's supposed picture, but they never show us her husband. And they never show you her sitting with her husband and his black mama. And they said the husband looked so black because he got elephantitis or some kind of disease that deformed him. Same disease most people in the world got, because most of us look like these people up here, you know? Let me tell you what's important about the symbols, especially for young people. See, if you can't see yourself, Malcolm X used to say, if you want to know where you stand, create a picture of the world and then find yourself in the picture. And if you're not in there, put yourself in there in a significant way. Well, when you're able to see yourself in the picture of the world in a significant way, it makes a difference about the kind of consciousness you develop. Consciousness. Now, when I show Akhenaten, and I show his mother, and then I show you a picture of the real Nefertiti, and then you see you looking at one black family. All right? That statue in the Berlin Museum that they claim is Nefertiti is the only white replica of her out of hundreds of replicas left in the Cairo Museum and in Egypt. That's the only one that depicts her as white. And the Germans say that they found this in a workshop as an unfinished model, took it to Berlin for 13 years, and in the 13th year it appeared in the museum as a white woman. That's deep. But this is important, and you already saw the little boy. Now I just have one other. Show you that Africans weren't messing around. This is Nefertari. Now Nefertiti means very beautiful, but Nefertari means most beautiful. Now Nefertari is the wife of the Ramses. But why I carry this picture is they had black paint, they had red paint, and they had white paint, and I'll be darned. They used it the same way they did for Mentuhotep. Black for the body, white for the garments, red for the trimmings. And there's something else, Hunter, that I saw. You see the tie that she has? You'll see this on many of the queens and the kings. And I happened to be in Uganda one year, and I was standing in front of a hotel where they had carvings of the Bukongo women. And that tie, the way this sash is tied and the way it's hung by the people of Uganda is the same as it's done in ancient Egypt. Oh, but deeper. All over ancient Egypt, you'll see the pharaohs and other royalties wearing a cloth we call kente, just like my sister wearing right there. So when you want to trace a people back, those are the kinds of things you look for, notwithstanding that the language we call hieroglyphs had two cursive forms that we know of, one called the Heretic script, one called the Demotic script. These are cursive form of hieroglyph. And we know that the Heretic script contained all of the same alphabet as the Meroitic script, which was a language of Sudan, which was older than the script of Egypt. Yet they said they can't read the Sudanic script, but they can read the northern script. But it gets deeper. Every one of the Aleph, Bat, Ta, Ta, Jim, Ha, Ka, Dal, Dal, Raz, As, Sin, Shin, Sa, Da, that's the alphabet of Arabic. Every single one appears in the Meroitic script of the Sudan and in the Demotic script of ancient Egypt. Isn't there why isn't somebody dealing with it? But let me bring this to conclusion and tell you what I'm saying. When we lived in Africa before the war, before the invasion of the Hittites, 1700 BC, before the invasion of the Hyksos first, 1700, and then the Hittites. These are lighter northern peoples invading our valley because we have produced this beautiful civilization because of the wonderful ecology and the balance that exists there. And then the invasion by the Assyrians, and then the invasion by the Persians, and then the invasions by the Greeks, and then the invasion by the Romans, and then the invasion by the Arabs. Oh yes, the Arabs invaded Africa. Let me just explain something, then I'm going to go on. I'm going to bring this to conclusion now, sister, because I want to tell folks here who you are so you can understand your connection to what I consider to be my notion of spirituality, which I'll summarize in 2 sentences probably. These invasions, starting at 1700 BC, that lasted right up till this present day, with the Americans, the Israelis, the British, and the Germans still carrying on the murder in Zaire while pretending they're trying to protect somebody. That invasion is still going on. all of these successive invasions into our country, into our land, forced our population southwards, such that the people who we call the Zulus in South Africa, only less than a little more than 1,000 years ago, was up there in Tanzania and Kenya. A lot of the people who are in Namibia was nearly up there where Nigeria is. The people in Nigeria, or the people in Ghana, many of them came from the place now called Saudi Arabia when it was Africa, because the people who now populated that we call Arabs are the children of the Romans, the Greek, the Hittite, and the Hyksos from the rape of our female population by the soldiers of those invading armies. You understand what I'm telling you? You got to understand this. Part of conquest is displacing of population and resettling of land by the foreign population who conquered. That's nothing new. But in the process of pushing this population from the east to the west, from the north to the south, we took our traditions with us. And that's why if you would venture to study any of the books of ancient Egypt, the pyramid text, the coffin text, the Book of Gates, the papyrus that they call the Book of the Dead, which is a series of different books called the coming forth by day or by night, or the coming out of the darkness into the light, or moving out of ignorance into enlightenment. That's all it means, through knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. If you begin to read these documents, you will find there is nothing in any of your so-called holy books that wasn't already written, and not a single prophet ever said there was. Because, let me do, and I got to do this little bit of history because it's important to understand our spiritualness. When the people we call the Hebrews, and this is my take on this thing, let me tell you what my take is. Some people call the Hyksos invades Africa, 1700 BC. They controlled the northern part of the Nile Valley for nearly 300, close to 400 years. All right? That valley gets taken over by the family of the Amenhotep, the ancestors of the family I just showed you, Queen Tai, Akhenaten, and so forth. But the remnants of the black people who had been socialized like us to think like the enemy of black people was running the show. They looked like black people, but they had the value system of the murderers and the invaders of black people. So when the children of the people from the South, who were the real black people, came and took control again, they didn't have to fight people who didn't look like them. They had to fight people who looked like them, who had the value system of people who once didn't look like them. You all understand what I'm saying? Because we had absorbed the people who had invaded, but they had left us with their traditions, or with their perversion of our tradition. In that situation that is created in North Africa, in the Nile Valley, when we come back and take the valley, but the forces who were there took it back. So this family, King Tut, represents the last of that Amenhotep family who's murdered. Before him, his brother Simkara is murdered. Before him, his big brother Akhenaten is murdered. And a man named Horemheb, a general in the army of the forces who had been overthrown, who traced his roots to the Hyksos in terms of gene pool, then took over Egypt. Well, the followers of the Africans from the south who are now trapped in the north goes into a civil war, led by an African by the name of Musa, who you call Moses. And and then they signed a peace treaty that allowed these people to leave. And they went into another black land, which they refer to in your religious book as Canaan, driving out the black people who were there, who were not a militaristic people, driving them into Yemen, Sudan, into Chad, into Nigeria, and finally these people would settle in Ghana on the Accra Plains, and they're known today as the Ga Adangbe people, who in their tradition say they're the Canaanites that was pushed out of Palestine by the Hebrew Israelites. This is all tradition among our people today, right? So if you begin to look at the history, because that's the only way you're going to understand spirituality. You can't understand spirituality in some feel-good abstraction. you are going to have to understand history. There's another people that call themselves the Ewe. They're in Togo, they're in the Volta region. I got you. And I'll do this quick. These Ewe people said that they're the Egyptians, priest class, and they've maintained a lot of the institutional construction among them, including something called the Vestal Virgins, which when you really get into, the West have been attacking it, and the institution have become corrupt, and the Lutheran Church is trying to destroy it. But when you study the institution, you'll see how they maintain such a critical spiritual leadership over their people. Nearly all the peoples of West Africa said they journey either from the Nile Valley or North Africa into West Africa during that period of war and invasion that I told you about. But what is critical is that those people established their spiritual institutions in the places they went. Institutions like voodoo, which is another word for God, and that's in the Fon language. And the Ewe who broke off of them used the word voodoo also to represent an aspect of God, God that dominates nature. The word for God is Lisa, which means the Almighty God. What's so important about all of this that I'm saying is that in 1492, some crazy drunk, pervert, murderer named Columbus and his boys and his gang came down to the West Coast where we were hiding out and got hooked up with some off-the-wall Turks masquerading as Muslims and created a genocide program called the Atlantic Slave Trade. And that's how most of us ended up in the UK and in the Western Hemisphere. But we are those people of West Africa who are those people of what was once called the Middle East, who are those people who built Mesopotamia when it was black before they painted it anthropologically white. We are those people of what is called Saudi Arabia before the children of the invaders took over. And those traditions established in the Nile Valley, re-established in West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, and was brought to the Western Hemisphere in all of its different forms, represent the spiritual institutions that is the culmination of the history and continuity of your ancestors. Now we, having been forced to accept the spiritual institutions of the murderers of our ancestors, must now reckon with the pathology that is now our normal behavior, and the only way we can reckon with it is to turn to our ancestors for solution. What would we have been behaviorally had we followed the continuity of your instructions and teachings? And then examine what have we become having adopted the historical continuity of the rapists and murderers of our mothers and fathers. Will we then become rapers and murderers of our own spiritual selves? And so in my conclusion, it's very simple. To love Africa is not only to understand her, it is to again become her. And you cannot become her unless you're the result of her experience, not the result of another people's experience. So, in my final word, as I thank you again for allowing me to impact on your consciousness only with my take on things. This is not the law. This may not even be valid an hour from now. But this is my take on things. And I hope I've stimulated you to want to examine your take on things. Because nothing I said mean anything if you can't check it out and see whether there's some validity to the logic I think I'm trying to lay out here. And that African spirituality really has to do with us trying to be at one with all things living and non-living. That we have no more rights than anything else in this universe. And if we have anything to call rights, it's a right to preserve the rest of life. Thank you very much.